It's a good thing I like short introductions. It is a pleasure to be here again. I've spoken at more of the MUFON symposia than anybody else. That means I'm older than most of the people here, I think. But I'll start with my standard comments at the beginning of all lectures. After 51 years of study and investigation, I've reached 4 major conclusions about flying saucers. I don't like the word UFOs. I like the word flying saucers. All flying saucer UFOs, very few UFOs are flying saucers. You can keep the UFOs. I'll take the flying saucers. First, the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some, underline 23 times, some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Most are not. I don't care about those. Second, the subject of flying saucers represents a kind of cosmic Watergate, meaning some few people within governments have known since at least July 1947 that indeed some UFOs are alien spacecraft. I am not saying everybody in government knows what's going on. Most people in government don't know anything about what's going on. The third is that there are no good arguments against the first 2 conclusions. Oh, they sound great until you look at the data, and then they collapse, and that's what we'll be focusing on tonight. The nasty, noisy negativists, which is what I usually call them, but pseudoscientific anti-ufologists, that's good enough. And the fourth conclusion is we're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. Visits to planet Earth by alien spacecraft, successful cover-up of the best data, bodies, and wreckage, for 62 years now. Tonight, I want to do something I've never done before, and that is to hit hard on the nasty, noisy negativists. I am sick and tired of people who call themselves scientists, many of them of whom have piled higher and deeper degrees, who attack UFOs in a totally unscientific fashion. If you're going to be a scientist, I think it's time to act like one. So I have some rules for pseudoscientific anti-ufologists. Incidentally, most of you know that I've been a slide man all my life. I've finally broken down and joined the 21st century, a little late, but I'm going to give you some of the basic rules for pseudoscientific anti-ufologists. First of all, ignore all large-scale scientific studies of UFOs. I mean, we're scientists. We certainly don't want to look at any scientific data that might change our minds. So in my normal lectures, I talk about 5 large-scale scientific studies, and I ask after each one, because I'm a sneaky son of a gun, how many people here have read this? And if I'm lucky, it's 1% or 2%. And there's a reason for doing that. So when somebody tries to give me a hard time, I can say, you hadn't read any of those sources, had you? Well, no. That's the difference between us then, isn't it? You know. So I learned early on, a long time ago, if you're going to be a scientist, you do a literature search. Find out what's already been done. One of the basic rules. These guys with PhD degrees, before they did their thesis, they certainly had to check to see that somebody else hadn't beaten them to the punch. The second thing is echo the false arguments of other pseudoscientific anti-ufologists. In other words, you don't need to do any research yourself. Find somebody who said the same stupid things you believe in and repeat them as if they're from an authoritative source. Well, it's easy to do. It doesn't mean anything from a scientific viewpoint. Quote the ancient academics and fossilized physicists. Now, of course, that's one of your major duties. Find somebody who says something negative, and therefore, by definition, something stupid, and quote them. I've heard more physicists say stupid things. You can't get here from there. There is no evidence. And I get physical scientists telling you how aliens would behave. If you were looking for viewpoints on earthling behavior, where would astronomers and physicists come in a list of people you'd go to? Pretty close to the bottom, I would think. Ignore the pragmatic engineers. This is one of my pets. I mean, I'm a physicist, but I worked with engineers in industry. They're the guys who try to get things done instead of figuring out how they can't be done, you know? One of my favorite little stories is Dr. Campbell, an astronomer, who figured out that the required initial launch weight of a rocket to get a man to the moon and back, this is in 1941, pages of equations, published a paper, would have to weigh 1,000,000 tons. Now, the guys who built Saturn V and got his 3 guys to the moon and back, and yes, I do believe we've been to the moon, the Saturn V at launch weighed not 1,000,000 tons, not 1,000,000,000 tons, 3,000 lousy tons. He didn't know a darn thing about how you go about getting to the moon. He assumed a single-stage rocket, launched directly up, limit of 1g acceleration, a whole bunch of other totally stupid assumptions that could only be made by people who know nothing at all about the subject, because none of those were new ideas. So that's one of your major rules now. Misinterpret relativity. I don't mean uncles and cousins. I'm talking about Einstein relativity. I've heard more stupid things. I keep using that word. I don't usually, but they deserve it. Don't you know that Einstein says you can't go faster than the speed of light? So look how long it would take you to get to Andromeda. What do I care about Andromeda? It's 2 million light years away. Give me Zeta Reticuli, 39 light years away. Well, it's still 78-year round trip time, right, Stan? No, wrong. They want half an Einstein. They forget the other part of Einstein is that time slows down for things going that fast. For 37 light years at 99.99% the speed of light, it only takes 6 months pilot time. We've had guys in space longer than that. Magellan's ship took 2 years to go around the planet. What's the big deal about 6 months pilot time? Also, there was a review of my book, Flying Saucers and Science. Friedman doesn't seem to understand that when you get close to the speed of light, your mass increases, so the pilots wouldn't even be able to move their arms. The mass increases, but from the point of view of the observer, not the guy who's there. Minor difference, you understand. Another one, misinterpreting relativity. Well, Stan, you know, the mass increases. That means it's going to take more and more energy to push particles out the back end of the rocket. Not if they're created with that energy, and we'll show you how to do that in a little bit. With nuclear fusion, the particles are born with an enormous amount of energy. You don't need to get them up to that velocity. They're there. Mother Nature's kind. We've been taking advantage of her for a long time, but she's kind. We'll get into that a little bit more. Ignore the national security aspects of UFOs. I'm still appalled by the fact that the SETI cultists, you know, SETI is silly effort to investigate. You've all heard that before. But the SETI cultists insist there is no national security aspect. When they get a signal, boy, they're going to tell the world. We've just received a signal from a star 650 light years away. Isn't that exciting? Pass the butter, Marge, would you? You know, wouldn't every major country on this planet like to build things with the UFO flight characteristics? You may have heard that we spend a lot of money on developing new means of transport for weapons and people to fight wars. The stealth aircraft only cost $10 billion in 10 years. Every country on the planet would love to be able to duplicate the flying saucer characteristics, flight characteristics. That's national security. Everybody would want to be concerned about what happens if the aliens invade. It's not as if we're nice guys and we know they wouldn't invade us. Just throw a number at you. During the Second World War, these idiot earthlings, this primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare, killed 50 million of their own kind, destroyed 1,700 cities. You expect aliens to be nice to us? How did we earn that? You know, the budget on this planet for things military is going to be over $1 trillion this year. 30,000 children died yesterday of needless, preventable disease and starvation. And today, and tomorrow, and the next day. This isn't a nice place. I love their attempts at saying how aliens would behave and what alien technology would be. Of course, they'd come here and land on the White House lawn. As the President of the United States, maybe some of you can help me here, does the President of the United States speak for 6.3 billion Earthlings? Not the last time I heard. Again, would you go to these guys for any insight as to aliens might behave, how they might behave? I don't think so. And their technology? Technology is developed in industry, basically. Large government-sponsored R&D programs. There are people here who know about such programs. And I shocked people by pointing out that when I was a young lad working at Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department of GE back in 1958, I hate to say it, some of you weren't even born then, we employed 3,500 people, 1,100 of them engineers and scientists, and we spent $100 million that year. Now that's a modest-sized development program. In industry, not in academia. The next one, these are all just talking points, really. You could do a whole dissertation on a bunch of these. Assume nothing special about the Earth. Why would anybody want to come here anyway? Well, you realize Earth is the only planet in the solar system that's practically covered with water, and it's covered with air that people like us can breathe. And most people don't talk about aliens' breathing apparatus and stuff. They seem to be able to breathe this air. Perhaps they don't notice that the Earth is the densest planet in the solar system. You mean the people? No. That may be true too. I don't know. But a cubic foot of Earth weighs more than a cubic foot of any other planet in the solar system. So what? Well, it means we got more heavy metals. And heavy metals are rare in the universe. And some of them are very valuable. Uranium, for example, weighs 18 times as much as water per cubic inch. You know what it was used for 100 years ago? Yellow coloring agent for dishes. That's illegal now, incidentally. We found other things to do with uranium. There are other oddball heavy metals, osmium, rhenium, platinum, rhodium, tungsten. There's a bunch of them. They have very special characteristics, and some of them might be very valuable at places that are older than us and therefore don't have as many because it takes sort of cooking in stars to make the heavy elements. The bottom of the ocean is covered with nodules of various metals. We're not picking them up, but there's no reason that some of these underwater or unknown submerged objects, USOs, they may be mining the bottom. All kinds of, I mean, they might like fish dinners too, you know, I'm not saying that's out, but one could go on, and I do in the paper a little bit, and I should add, incidentally, this is obviously, I am not reading my paper from the proceedings. I strongly recommend that you buy the proceedings so you can find out the written version of what people will be presenting. I doubt if many people are going to be reading their presentation, so you need that. Assume absence of evidence is evidence for absence. That sounds a little weird until you realize Dr. Michael Shermer said, give him a body and he'll believe in flying saucers. He doesn't have one, they can't be real. Why would any rational person expect him to have one? Why would any rational person expect him to have any highly classified documents? His reasoning is if he doesn't have any, they don't exist. That's pretty weird when you think about it. And it comes up in a lot of other, well, you don't have any this or you don't have any that or you can't prove this. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Majestic 12, one of my favorite subjects, and I feel 98% of the documents are phony, but it's the 2%, 4 documents that aren't that matter. So watch that kind of thinking, if you can call it thinking. Oh, repeat misinformation about Roswell and the Hill case. I happen to have written books about both of these, so I am particularly concerned with the stupid things that are being said. The scientific director for what used to be the Committee for Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, which is now called CSI, I think there's an attempt to make it sound like they're doing something sensible, like the program on television. This is a Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. They're not skeptics, they're debunkers. They're not the same, they know the answer. Let me give you an example. 12 years ago, Dr. Joseph Nickel, who's their chief scientific investigator with 3 degrees in English and a lot of experience as a magician, who's a master of deception to begin with, he knew the answer for, I was on the other end, we were being interviewed at the same time, me and Roswell, he in Los Angeles. We couldn't see each other, but we could hear each other. He knew the explanation for Roswell. That PR man made up the story to try to get attention. You don't even know his name, do you? Well, no. Well, I've known Walter Haut for almost 20 years. To suggest that the PR man for the most elite military group in the world, the 509th, they dropped 4 atomic bombs, nobody else can say that, would make up a story on his own is absurd. Okay, that was in 1950. I'm sorry, the 50th anniversary of Roswell, 1997. So 12 years later, the first issue of the Skeptical Inquirer for this year, the Roswell story is a result of an inexperienced PR man putting out an unauthorized press release. Still doesn't mention his name. It's still total balderdash. He was authorized by Colonel Blanchard, and he'd been talked to about this. So why do you repeat nonsense? There's a lot more about Roswell that's been nonsensical, but that's one example to illustrate the point. The Betty and Barney Hill case. Kathleen Marden, who's here, did most of the work on our book, captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. And we keep running across people who can't seem to get their facts straight. There was a book, after all, The Interrupted Journey, way back in the mid-60s. We know what was said during the dreams that Betty had. We know what was said during the hypnosis sessions. And these people can't get either one of these straight. Oh, Barney was just repeating what he'd heard 1,000,000 times, Betty reading about her dreams. Total nonsense. No basis for it. It was just a light in the sky. That's all they saw. Without the hypnosis, they described something that they watched through binoculars, maybe 100 feet away, double row of windows, beings inside. They saw it alongside the Old Man of the Mountain, which has since fallen into the lake, but it was a big site in New Hampshire. And they said it was twice the size of the height of the face, and we know how big that was, 48 feet, I think it was. This is a light in the sky? It's just Jupiter. They watched it go in front of the moon. Boy, that's strange behavior. And these same stupid arguments get recycled over and over again, despite the fact that the data's all out there. I'm not saying they should all buy our books. It's not a bad idea, but don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. And what the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. I like the next one. Well, like is the wrong word, but assume aliens are perfect, so no crashes. I've had some people tell me, now, Stan, look, you're telling me somebody's coming here from 39 light years away, and they crash? I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. And I say, that's not what I'm telling you. My reading of the UFO scene is that there are motherships, big old ships that carry lots of little small Earth excursion modules. They're the ones that crash. They're the ones that zip around in the atmosphere. And I'll show you a picture later of a big aircraft carrier, which carries 75 little aircraft. 2 different jobs, 2 different modes of propulsion. It makes no sense to suggest, and we do have, incidentally, some very exciting observations of huge motherships. The case up in the Yukon, civil engineer Martin Jasek, he's written it up. He got testimony from 10 different groups of witnesses so he could triangulate. You know, the front end was over the mountain, the back end was over the lake, etc. The size of this thing was only between 0.6 and 1.2 miles long. Miles long. That's a pretty darn big old craft. So, are aliens perfect? Of course they're not. Read Bud Hopkins. There's a brand new book out that Bud has, a memoir. The many cases where abductees are returned with the wrong clothes on, with the shirt on backwards, the wrong house even on occasion. They're not perfect. Why would you expect that they would be? I mean, you'd think we don't have things crash. Those 2 shuttles just disappeared, they didn't crash. We build things that crash too. Human error, Mother Nature gets in the way. The unexpected. I still don't know what happened to the plane from Brazil to Paris, the Air France plane. I don't know why the plane the other day, and I mentioned this only because I was in Brazil a few weeks ago, but another plane coming from Brazil hit a downdraft and had to land in Miami. They only hurt about 23 people, I think. Why? They ran into clear air turbulence. Well, why didn't you know it was there? We're not perfect. And aliens aren't either. Now, I get a real kick out of the people who claim there is no physical evidence. Ted Phillips is here. He will tell you in his talk about 3,900 physical trace cases from 92 countries. That's a lot of physical evidence. We have radar visual sightings where people have recorded the radar tapes and recorded the radio conversations with the pilots of the airplanes. Yes, that's physical evidence. MUFON, I guess it was last year, went over the radar tapes from the FAA for the Stephenville, Texas case. And you know what? There were some unknowns there. Big old thing that stopped and stayed in the same place for quite a while. Oh, and some of those Air Force planes that supposedly hadn't been scrambled. You know, we don't have any F-16s up there. Well, there are only 10. How do you lose 10 F-16s? You know? Radar visual sightings are important because we often have cases where we have radar on the ground, radar in the sky, eyes in the sky, and talking to people on the ground. Not just once or twice. Happens often. But you won't hear about it from these pseudoscientific anti-ufologists. I just talked about Ted, so we'll go through that. Now, I thought you might enjoy some quotes from experts. This is from Carl Sagan. Now, I liked Carl. We were classmates for 3 years. He's done more than anybody else I know, when he was alive, of course, to get people interested in the notion of extraterrestrial intelligence. Aliens out there, but they ain't coming here. This is an early statement that he made that he didn't change over the next 20-some years. The reliable cases are uninteresting, and the interesting cases are unreliable. Unfortunately, there are no cases that are both reliable and interesting. Was there any reference given for that? No. Why did he say it? I don't know. Is it true? No. I'll show you what the real data is in a minute. But here's an outstanding scientist, probably been on Johnny Carson more than anybody. Everybody remembers who Johnny Carson was. I'm dating myself. That's all right. I celebrated my 75th birthday last week. I'm entitled to date myself. Thank you. That's a reward for living a long time. Here's another bright sighting, a bright comment. The unexplained sightings are simply those for which there is too little information to provide a solid factual basis for an explanation. That's Dr. Ben Bova. He was editor of Analog, a lot of other things. I sent him tables of data, which I'll show you in a couple minutes. Didn't change his mind at all, showing that what he said was totally false. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. Dr. Isaac Asimov. Now, the whole chapter in my new book about science fiction and UFOs. And it's mostly about the fiction put out by science fiction writers like Isaac. Here's a good example. Almost every sighting is either a mistake or a hoax. These reports are so riddled with hoaxes, and the flying saucers enthusiasts have so many cranks, freaks, and nuts among them, that Hynek, Dr. J. Allen, is constantly running the risk of innocently damaging his reputation by being confused with them. That sounds very profound. Basis given? None. Reference given? None. Is it true? It's total malarkey. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. One of my favorite astronomers, Dr. Donald Menzel, Harvard University professor, whom nobody knew was working for the government for more than 30 years, longer continuous association with the National Security Agency of anybody, which I discovered to my great surprise. I didn't like him while he was alive. I developed a lot of appreciation for him afterward. But here's a statement. All non-explained sightings are from poor observers. Any source of information? No. reference to information? No. Is it true? No. We'll show you. And here's the granddaddy of them all, from no less an authority than the Secretary of the Air Force. Who should know more about UFOs and the Air Force and stuff? This dates way back. But it set the tone for more than 50 years of misinformation. On the basis of this study, he was talking about a study I'll talk about in a minute, Blue Book Special Report 14. We believe that no objects such as those properly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. I feel certain that even the unknown 3% could have been explained as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been obtained. That appeared in newspapers all across the land on October 25th, 1955. Now, who should know more than the Secretary of the Air Force? Well, as it turns out, almost anybody who bothered to look at the evidence. Now, we first have to ask the question, why such strange views? And I will play amateur psychiatrist. Lord knows they play amateur ufologists often enough. One, smart people like Carl Sagan, Isaac Asimov, etc., believe weird things that there is no useful data because they are skilled at defending beliefs they arrived at for non-smart reasons. And there's a second reason, the confirmation bias. That's the tendency to seek or interpret evidence favorable to already existing beliefs and to ignore or reinterpret evidence unfavorable to already existing beliefs. Oh, the author of that book, Why People Believe Weird Things, Michael Shermer, head of the Skeptical Society. But he never turned it around on himself. When we appeared on the Larry King Show, he started off by saying, look, there's nothing to UFOs. This is one of those phenomena, borderline, if you will, paranormal, for which there's just too little information to reach a conclusion. So you're always going to get a 5% residue effect. Sounds very profound. It's total nonsense. He gave me an opening big enough to drive a truck through, and I took it. Here's the report, biggest study ever done, just so you have a title for it. Blue Book Special Report 14. There are a few copies at my table because some people say, show me. Well, you can look. There's a categorization of 3,201 sightings from BBSR 14. That's Project Blue Book Special Report 14. I'm used to using a pointer, but I can't see the screen, so it's very difficult to do that. So I got to use this technical gadget up here. Okay, the unknowns, they're the only ones we're interested in. Percentage unknowns, 3%? Forget it. 21.5%. That's not a mathematical round-off. It's an outright lie to say 3%. Oh, notice the next to the last category there. Insufficient information, 9.3%. Here's a quality. Let me go back on that once. He says if more observational data had been available, they'd have been explained too. By definition, that was untrue. It was a lie. If there wasn't enough information, it was listed under insufficient information. What you'd expect. Okay. Here's the quality evaluation. Remember Carl said something about reliability? Well, they did a quality evaluation of all those cases. Of the excellent sightings, 35% were unknowns. Of the worst ones, only 18%. They did something else. They asked an obvious question. Is there any difference between the unknowns and the knowns? Maybe we just missed the boat. They did a chi-square analysis. Don't worry what that means. Looked at 6 different characteristics, apparent size, color, shape, speed, that sort of stuff. And they found that the probability that the unknowns were just misknowns was less than 1%. Less than 1%. The two groups do not match. So where do these guys get off making these false proclamations and not being challenged by other scientists or the media? It's like there's an embargo on, don't say anything that would embarrass pseudoscientific anti-ufologists by showing the truth as compared to what they say. Now, lest you think this happens only with regard to UFOs, it doesn't. Here's a famous statement. Kathleen Martin and I are working on a new book about stupid statements by smart people. This is one of my favorite ones. The demonstration that no possible combination of known substances, known forms of machinery, and known forms of force can be united in a practical machine by which man shall fly long distances through the air seems to this writer as complete as it is possible for the demonstration of any physical fact to be. Dr. Simon Newcomb was the outstanding astronomer of the 19th century. He said that 1 month before, or 2 months before the Wright brothers' first flight. What did he know about flying? Not a darn thing. What did these two bicycle mechanics know? They ran wind tunnel tests on all kinds of stuff. They knew a lot, and they flew. He was so important a figure that the President of the United States attended his funeral. But statements like that, which were well publicized, kept a lot of other people from spending any money on development of these impossible machines. One of my favorites, the British astronomer royal, Sir Richard van der Riet Woolley, made many silly claims about spaceflight, including when speaking to Time magazine. It's utter bilge. I don't think anybody will ever put up enough money to do such a thing. What good would it do us? If we spent the same amount of money on preparing first-class astronomical equipment, we would learn much more about the universe. It is all rather rot. He said this 1 year before Sputnik. What group has benefited the most from space stuff? The astronomical community. Got a whole bunch of outstanding observatories up there, not just the Hubble, there's a whole bunch more. But again, attitudes like this have kept people from being involved, governments from spending the money. You got to fight against this kind of nonsense. I might as well throw in a few UFO pictures just on general principles. These are ones you don't see very often. This is Salt Lake City, Utah. The date's there. That's the Mormon temple that you can see over on the right side of number 3. And here. I stood at the exact place where these pictures were taken. I met with a photographer. There wasn't a glass thing there that he could be pasting stuff on or anything like that. I particularly like this one because I believe that's an ionized air plasma around it, related to a magneto-aerodynamic propulsion system similar to the electromagnetic submarine that was built in the 60s and successfully operated. But I figured this would be a little different from the usual stuff. Now, I get particularly upset at the failure to take into account the advancements that have been made in propulsion systems. I like this one because I worked on this. This is the NRX A6 nuclear rocket reactor propulsion system. It's not a model. This thing operated successfully way back in 1968. It was this big. Turn off the phones. It was this big. The power level was 1,100 megawatts, half the power of Grand Coulee Dam. This big, 1968. Make a great upper stage for a trip to Mars. But of course, we don't have courage enough to set a goal to go to Mars. We're thinking about talking about the possibility of perhaps at some time in the future investigating the possibility of going to Mars. That's leadership? Not where I come from. But this is a real system, real hardware. You paid for it. It's on the shelf. There's a bigger one. Los Alamos built one. This is the 1B. The 2B was maybe 7 feet diameter. Power level was only 4,400 megawatts. Twice the power of Grand Coulee Dam. It was this big. It was successfully tested way back in the late 60s. Not by some university crew. Los Alamos National Laboratory, which was technically operated by the University of California, but we don't count that. Now, one of the areas that really distresses me is the noisy negativists, the pseudoscientific anti-ufologists, act as if the only way you could get anywhere outside the Earth would be with a chemical rocket. You know, you heard that on the Peter Jennings mockumentary on February 24th, I think it was 2005, when the head of the Hayden Planetarium in New York commented with a laugh that, you know, scientists like to be there when their experiments are finished. Our fastest craft is the Voyager spacecraft. It takes 70,000 years to get to the next nearest star. Who's going to talk about going to other stars? He didn't tell you a vital fact. There's no propulsion system on the darn thing. It's been coasting since it left Earth. It's like saying throw a bottle into the ocean. It'll tell you how long it takes for a nuclear submarine to get across the ocean. Or fly a kite, and that tells you how long an airplane will take. Total nonsense. But is there a better means? You'd think every astronomer in the country in the world would know. They all know that the stars out there, there are lots of them, they'll tell you that, produce their energy not by chemistry, but by nuclear fusion. I'm not saying that's the ultimate. We haven't been around very long. We're newcomers on the universal stage, the neighborhood stage. I like nuclear fusion. If we didn't have it working, the sun wouldn't be producing the energy we need, and we'd be tough out of luck. But can you use it for propulsion? Of course you can. It's going to cost you a lot of money. But Aerojet General Nucleonics had a $9 million contract with the United States Air Force to look at nuclear fusion for deep space travel. Way back in the 60s, early 60s. I worked on the program. And it's kind of nifty. What's the advantage of fusion? Well, you'll see some numbers up there. MeV, million electron volts. It's an amount of energy. Now, how does that compare with what we normally know? Well, chemical reactions, you know, burning gas in your car, if you don't have a hybrid. You produce, there's a few electron volts, under 20 electron volts per chemical reaction. Fusion reactions can produce as much as 18 million electron volts per reaction. And if you use the right stuff, and engineers like to do the right things, not the wrong things, and say it can't be done, you can produce almost all your energy in charged particles. Now, who cares? Well, a charged particle has the beauty that it interacts with electric and magnetic fields, and you can make them all go that way, out the back end of the rocket. You're not accelerating them to 18 million electron volts. You're just directing them that way. So, and a crude way of putting it is, you can produce particles that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in a dumb old chemical rocket. Not 10, not 1,000, 10 million times. Is this something new and incredible? Every astronomer knows that fusion is what makes the stars work. Again, I'm not saying it's the ultimate. Of course it isn't, because we're not the ultimate in thinking. We'll find something new. And being the earthlings that we are, we very quickly, once we found out about fusion, which was 1938, some of you were even alive at that time, we put it to use. We're very good about such things, we earthlings are. In 1952, we set off this beauty, the first H-bomb, fusion explosion. This is an island in the Pacific, much of which disappeared when we ran the test. Okay. The fireball was 3 miles wide. The amount of energy released, the equivalent of exploding 10 million tons of TNT. 10 million tons. We should have a contest. What did the aliens say when they saw that thing go up? These idiots on this planet are really going ape, you know. Now, for comparison, during World War II, the big bombs were the 10-ton blockbusters that we bombed Europe and Japan with. Japan, we use mainly fire bombs because the nice guys we are, we'd rather burn people up than explode bombs on them. But so from 10 tons of TNT to 10 million tons in less than 10 years. That's real progress, you could say. So my point here is that anybody, any thinking person who's dug into this knows that we have other means for doing things than dumb old chemical rockets. We got to get some engineers to work. It's going to cost a lot of money. The Manhattan Project only cost $2 billion in 1942 dollars, roughly the equivalent of $20 billion now. And was done in secret. And there are people who tell you the government can't keep secrets. No, they can't keep secret. Nixon couldn't keep Watergate secret, could he? No. But has the government kept other things secret? Well, yeah. Think of the Corona spy satellite, not the cigar or the Toyota. That was the name of it. Naval Research Lab developed it. The first one, which was successful, got more information about Soviet military installations than all the U-2 flights that preceded it. That was in 1960. But since we can't keep secrets, somehow we managed so that the public never heard about this until 1995, by which time techniques, of course, had greatly improved, as you might expect, because we spent a lot of money on it. One example, the National Reconnaissance Office. They're the big guys on the block. They spend, nobody knows, but it's estimated their annual black budget is $10 to $20 billion a year, not under direct congressional control. But they they launched 7 Poppy satellites between 1962 and 1971. These were spying on Soviet ships at sea. We first found out about those in 2005. And NRO is famous for having satellite, the business end of a satellite, cost as much as $250 million. That's a lot of money. Done in secret. Not by 6 professors and 12 grad students, I might add. Thousands of people work on those programs. So there's a lot going on. We can keep secrets. There are many more examples. On the other hand, I'm strongly opposed to those who say, we are entitled to know everything. We want the government to open all the files on UFOs. We're entitled to know. Not as far as I'm concerned. There is a legitimate need for national security. Key lesson, key phrase here. You can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. They read the papers, they listen to television, they listen to the radio. Aren't we entitled to know? No. Suppose we figured out a new way to detect things flying in the atmosphere besides radar. Should we publicize that? Hey, Osana, come on and buy it, would you? It's dumb. I do not think we should release everything, especially technology. Now, I certainly don't agree. One of the disclosure projects tells you, invest your money in this company which is going to develop free energy that we actually developed by back engineering the Roswell crash. I've seen no example of that, and I've seen no proof at all that that's been done. Sounds good. Free energy for everybody on the planet. Sure, the sun is free too. The converter costs money. The wind is free too, but the wind turbines cost money too. And I noticed the last time I looked, the sun doesn't shine all the time, and the wind doesn't blow all the time either. That's not the end-all and be-all. But be assured, governments can keep secrets. They don't keep them by telling everybody and say, please don't tell anybody else. They keep them by having you get security clearances and a need to know for that particular information. Just because you have a top secret clearance doesn't give you access to all top secret information. I learned that when I was working on nuclear airplanes, working on radiation shielding, and looking at classified abstracts, I found that the nuclear Navy was doing a lot of what sounded like interesting work. I tried to get those classified documents. I had the right clearance. Couldn't get a need to know from Radwell Rickover. And that's common in many different areas of technology here. So there's another part of need to know. Some of the people around Washington think they are so important that if this were true, I would know about it because I'm important, and I don't know about it, so it must not be true. It's kind of the New York Times attitude. All the news that's fit to print, you know, that we see fit to print, they mean. David Susskind used to have a talk show a long time ago. I got called living in California. There was a big wave of sightings in the early 70s. He wanted a good recent case. I got him the Coyne helicopter case. He wanted an abductee. I got Betty Hill. He wanted a good skeptic. I said, there aren't any, but here's how to reach Phil Klass. Wanted me to send them all kinds of stuff. I did. They flew me to New York. I spent one night there. Between taping of various segments, he says to me, I'm sitting right next to him, he says, you know, I read the New York Times. There's nothing in there that says these things are real. So we have a new syndrome, the David Susskind syndrome. If aliens were visiting Earth, that would be important. Nobody denies that. But if we're important, I, who keep track of everything that's important, would know about it, and I don't, so it must not be, and I'm not going to waste my time about something that doesn't exist. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's a big part of the problem here. I kind of like this picture. E equals mc squared times 40. This is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier operated by the United States Navy. And you'll notice it carries a lot of pretty far-out fighter planes there. Now, this illustrates what I was saying about the motherships. The aircraft carrier is very large, almost a quarter-mile long. It can operate, honest to God, for 18 years without refueling. 18 years. Think of all the diesel fuel that isn't being used for this. And if anybody wants an explanation, I'll tell you how later. There's no magic here. Not even MAJIC. I mean, it operates only on the water. Those little airplanes can fly for what? An hour, 2 hours on a really good day without refueling. That's what I was talking about before about motherships and little Earth excursion modules. Different functions. And, you know, I don't know who arranged this picture, but I got a kick out of it. We have more than one nuclear-powered carrier, incidentally. And the Russians do, too. They're pretty big targets, but they can move awful fast. One of the things that happened when we started using nuclear energy in the Navy was suddenly you could operate the ship full speed ahead forever. Normally, you use so much fuel that you can only run a little while at top speed before you got to get refueled. And in the wartime, where are you going to get the fuel? I mean, the Brits had coaling stations, but in a big aircraft carrier like this, where are you going to get enough fuel? You certainly change the rules of the game when you go to nuclear. You know that there are nuclear submarines that can go around the world underwater without surfacing? They take periscope leave at Hawaii. They wave at Hawaii when they put the periscope up. It's a whole new way of doing things, and it's time we recognized it. This looks complicated, but it isn't. It's just to illustrate the point. How much acceleration can people stand? There's a book that's physics for people who don't think they'd like physics. I don't like the book, but when you get to 9 Gs, you die. Well, yeah, if you smash into a wall while being accelerated at 9 Gs or 2 Gs, you're going to get clobbered. Well, how much acceleration can you stand? The answer, very simply, is it depends. What does it depend on? Well, the direction of the acceleration versus the body. Ever notice that the astronauts go up on their back? Why is that? Because back to front, they can stand a lot more acceleration than foot to head. Your knees and hips don't really like all that acceleration. It depends on how long the acceleration is operating for. It turns out, look at the, whoops. Told you I was new at this. Look at this curve here. Back to front, a trained pilot can perform a tracking task while being accelerated at 14 Gs for 2 minutes. Now, what does that mean? 14 Gs is an acceleration of 300 miles per hour per second. So properly constrained. You're not walking around drinking a beer while this is going on. You can stand 14 Gs for 2 minutes, 120 seconds. That means at the end of 1 second, you're going 300 miles an hour. And in 10 seconds, you're going 3,000 miles an hour. At the end of 2 minutes, you're going 36,000 miles an hour, and you're long since out of sight and off the Earth. These are measured data. They're done on centrifuges. We're not sending guys in space to do this. This is measured data. Now, what's equally intriguing, if you go back to the short times, it turns out you can stand 30 Gs for 1 second. What does that mean? 0 to 600 miles an hour in 1 second. You'd certainly say that was impossible if you saw that happen, wouldn't you? But the reality is 0 to 600 miles an hour in 1 second. And you can handle it. Not for long. And you can't be 85 years old and just had 3 heart attacks. Well, you know, there are limitations on these things. But I hear people talking about it. I have great fun on campuses. Sometimes I'm asked to do a physics seminar, and they're lying in wait for me just ready to pounce, you know. And I make sure I talk about things I know they know nothing about. Nasty. And then I ask them simple questions. What's the numerical value of 1 G? 9.8 meters per second squared. I said, that's right. How do you relate that to a Corvette? They look at me like I'm speaking Swahili. They don't want to deal with the real world. Well, 1 G is about 23 miles an hour per second. Or 21, I'm sorry. So at the end of 3 seconds, you'd be going 63 miles an hour, and boy, you got a hot car, too. Because a typical car takes 5, 6, 7 seconds to get up there. That's 1 G. Then I ask them, okay, how much is the speed of light? 300,000 kilometers per second. Everybody knows. I say, okay, how long does it take at 1 G to get to the speed of light? It's a multiple choice question. 1,000 years, 100 years, 10 years, or 1 year. You'd be surprised how many of the profs guess 1,000 years, or 100 years, or 10 years. It's 1 year. One lousy year at 1 G gets you close to the speed of light. That's the real world. We all know we can stand 1 G. You're standing it right now. So these are the kinds of things that get me upset at some of these guys. Here's the star, one of the many 26 different three-dimensional models that Marjorie Fish built based on the Betty Hill star map. It's a fascinating piece of work done by an amateur who was very smart. It's talked about in the book, Captured. I bring it up because most of the outsiders, of course, don't know anything about it. And they'll give you phony reasons for why the work doesn't mean anything. Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli, that's what we're talking about. Just to give you a different perspective. Here are 2 sun-like stars that are 1/8 of a light year apart. That's 35 times closer to each other than the sun is to the next star over. They're only 39 light years from us, and they're a cool billion years older than the sun. You think they might know something we don't know? I do. This gets into all these questions of technology and cover-up and all that sort of stuff. This is about the Majestic 12 documents and how I think some of them are the most important classified documents ever leaked to the public. And don't listen to most of the baloney. You'll hear about them. Oh. Bill Nye, the science guy, on Larry King. You know, Bill Nye, whose purpose is to deny. You've heard that before. He showed a document in which a person's address had been removed. All these people are saying there's a cover-up. There's no cover-up. You're just respecting privacy. Fortunately, I had my book with me and could pull out this one. This is a CIA UFO document. It took me 5 years to get, and you can read 8 words on it. And they're not people's addresses. And people say, why don't you just scrape off the black? They Xeroxed it first. They're not stupid. They may be nasty, but they're not stupid. This is my favorite one. on the whole page. This is a CIA UFO document. It took me 5 years to get. Deny in toto. They couldn't find 8 lousy words to declassify on this. But they're not holding anything back, Stan. There's no cover-up. The NSA, typical NSA document. This took a lot of years to get declassified. Isn't it exciting? You can read 1 sentence per page of 160 pages of NSA UFO information. Very exciting. Don't tell me the rest of that is sources and methods information. That's the excuse given. I don't believe it for a minute, and you shouldn't either. Crash saucers, there's my early book. There are a few copies available, if we haven't sold out by tomorrow night. One of my favorite explanations for Roswell's story, the crash test dummies. I talked to this gentleman after he was retired. He was a colonel. He was in charge of the program. The one in the middle is Sierra Sam, the dummy. He pointed out to me that he weighed 175 pounds and was 6 feet tall, and none of them were dropped until 6 years after Roswell. 6 feet tall, 175 pounds, and somehow it morphed. I mean, time travel is bad enough, but it morphed into a critter less than 4 feet tall with a big bald head. That's pretty good stuff for Hollywood. Not for the real world. Oh yeah, the wreckage from the Roswell crash. You notice a little piece of paper that General Ramey's holding in his hand. This was taken with a very fine speed graphic camera with very high resolution, not like today's solid state cameras, digital cameras. The Air Force says they showed that to an agency, unspecified. They couldn't find anything to read on it. Dr. David Rudiak did, and he's an optometrist. He knows something about vision. And it talks about victims of the wreck and other nice, normal terms like that. All balloons have victims of the wreck in them, don't they? Jesse Marcel Jr. wrote this book. I wrote the foreword. You know, he was on that mockumentary. They didn't bother to say that he was a medical doctor, a colonel, a flight surgeon. And when he was on the show, he was on leave. He put in 225 combat hours flying helicopters in Iraq. He was 68 years old when they called him back in. The audience wasn't told that he was a doctor, a colonel, a flight surgeon, a combat pilot. I don't consider that legitimate journalism. You've seen that one before. Oh yes, the noisy negativists do pay their debts. Phil Klass paid me $1,000 for proving him wrong about one of the MJ-12 documents. He told everybody about challenging me and nobody about paying me. That's why there's a copy in my book. Another good book. How come the astronomers who are anti-UFO never talk about it, the astronomer who was the Air Force consultant for 20 years? Why would he know anything? Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Excellent book. The Condon Report. According to a special UFO subcommittee of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, world's largest group of space scientists, 30% of the 117 cases studied in detail could not be identified. You didn't hear it from Dr. Condon or from the noisy negativists. One of the better documents, Symposium on UFOs, hearings before the House Committee on Science and Astronautics, testimony from 12 scientists. I was the only one without a PhD. I'm proud of that, I guess. The best papers by Dr. James E. McDonald. Report on 41 excellent sightings. How come the noisy negativists never talk about this one? It's a government report. You've seen most of these already. There's some DVDs out there. Here's testimony from 27 Roswell witnesses, most of whom are dead and cannot be interviewed again, by anybody I know, anyway. Shoot Them Down about the Flying Saucer Air Wars of 1952. Excellent work by Frank Ficino. 1 minute, okay. Well, we're coming out just about right. There's a 2 DVD set. Thanks for listening. Hey, it came out right. Thank you.